Hello, I'm Vladimiras Laučius, Senior Analyst at Eastern Europe Studies Center, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for discussing the tensions in the Ukrainian-Russian border. I also want to emphasize that this discussion is the continuation of fruitful collaboration between Ukrainian Institute of the Future and Eastern Europe Studies Center that I have pleasure to represent here as a moderator. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Iliya Kusa, the representative of Ukrainian Institute for of the Future, for the possibility of this event, as well as forthcoming events that we are going to have in close cooperation between our two institutions. The main speakers of our today's discussion, whom I have an honor to introduce, are Iliya Kusa, International Relations Expert at Ukrainian Institute of the Future, and Andrzej Pukszto, who is an Associate Professor at Vytautas Magnus University, Kaunas.
Good morning.
Unfortunately, Andrzej Pukszto informed me yesterday that he had to revoke his promise to take part in this event. So we are going to have a slight variation in our schedule and finish not at 11:30, but a bit earlier, maybe at 11 o'clock. Now, the first and actually introductory question to our participants is what is going to happen next in the Ukrainian-Russian border? And I mean not only the geographical border, but also political borderline that divides the West and the rest in nowadays Europe. So what does each of you think about this? Iliya, please be the first to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for organizing this event. And I think this is really important today to talk on this issue, as it really has become, during the last month, it has become one of the burning issues, I think, in actually in today's agenda. Well, for now, it seems like the situation, the tense situation on the Russian-Ukrainian border is a bit calmer than it was 2 months ago. So the opinion in Ukraine is that, well, the situation is, not that tense as it was, and actually our officials are talking about that. They also seem to be more relaxed about this than it was at the beginning of January, for example, or especially at the beginning of February, when the talks between Russia and different Western countries were still going on. So the latest visit by French President Emmanuel Macron showed that actually there are some agreements between the European Union or the West in general and Russia on how to de-escalate around Ukraine. At least there were official statements on that, but they are still not, they're unclear in many aspects, because in Ukraine there is no specific understanding on what actually was agreed upon and what our European partners, our Western partners are going to propose in order to calm down the situation or de-escalate. So actually, I think that this whole situation actually has two dimensions. The first one is really Ukraine-centered. So regarding Ukraine, it is really about Russia very much willing to have so to speak, have a closure of Ukrainian issue, because the issue of Ukraine has been dragging on since 2014, since Russia occupied part of eastern Ukraine and Crimea. And this was really frustrating for Russia, because they were pushing constantly for, well, in this part, for Minsk agreements to be implemented. They weren't able to do that. And now it seems that they see this situation as some kind of a momentum for them to push forward this topic. So for them, for Russians, it is firstly about how to deal with Ukrainian issue, how to reach an agreement with the West on Ukraine. And it is, I think here it is an important point to stress out that if we analyze what Vladimir Putin says and Russian officials, they actually have this, they are singling out this one audience, which are the Americans and President Joe Biden, with which Putin speaks actually. So he doesn't speak with Zelensky, he doesn't care about what Ukraine thinks, and this is how they perceive the situation. So they think that this is a good time today for them to reach an understanding with the West on how to deal with Ukraine. And my understanding is that, especially after President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Moscow and then to Kyiv, is that they will try to find a compromise on Ukraine through this idea of implementation of Minsk agreements, which both our Western partners and Russia sees, well, at least for today, and for this moment, they see these agreements as the only and sole base on which they can compromise, because there is no alternative plans, there are no alternative agreements, and this is something that they see as a mutually understanding compromise, which is of minimum risk to their interests, so to the interests of the Western countries and to Russia. So for Russia, it's actually an ideal plan to implement the Minsk agreements, and by this, at least close part of Ukraine's problem for them. Now, the second dimension of the whole situation, to my opinion, is more global. It's not about Ukraine only. I think that the whole situation which was unfolding during the last 3 months is about how the Russians trying to push forward this narrative about a new world order, which they think is coming. Because as actually when Russians started to talk about the so-called security guarantees last year, and I think especially it became clear after Putin went to China and signed this joint statement with the Chinese leader, they are actually exploiting what is going on in the world. They are actually trying to push the discourse about that the Western-led post-Cold War world order is over for them, and they see it as an opportunity for them to try to talk about about some kind of a new system with new rules, where Russia sees itself as one of key global players on this international arena. And here I think, it is very clear when the Geneva consultations took place between the Americans and Russians in January, and it was very clear that Russians are trying to talk more about global politics, not to confine the consultations to Ukraine or Minsk agreements. They were trying to talk about fundamental things, the things that are really fundamental for European security, for Western countries. And I think this dimension, this part of story, will not end even if the West and Russia will compromise on Ukraine and Minsk agreements, for example. But I don't think that this story, which Russia pursues since I think mid-2000s, about how to challenge the Western-led world order, will end just there. So I think the whole story about Ukraine could be, I think we could see a de-escalation if there will be some kind of understanding between the West and Russia on how to implement Minsk agreements. Although there are certain factors that could hinder this possibility, because whereas the Minsk agreements are could be seen as as not that risky or costly for Russia and the West, but of course in Ukraine the agreements themselves and the idea of them implementing it on Russian terms is being very politically toxic. And of course there are plenty of people in Ukraine who would oppose such a move. But still, even if we consider that this is the scenario they will go forward, the problem remains about principal relations between Russia and the West, because in my opinion, I mean, Ukraine. So this situation is Ukraine-centered, but it's not about Ukraine. So it's not only about Ukraine. Ukraine here is just an element in Russian foreign policy, a problem which they want to solve, but they see it as part of a more global issue, which is Russia is being dissatisfied of what they see as Western domination in the European security architecture and global security architecture, and they want somehow to challenge this, and they see today's moment as kind of chance for them to do that. So I think in the following months, we will see. I think we will see attempts by different foreign players, including our European partners, France and Germany, in particular, and Russia, to try to push Ukraine into implementing Minsk. So returning the occupied territories, but of course on the terms that were, they're being pushed by Russians mainly, and try to, and this will be their way of how to, reach some kind of understanding so that to de-escalate situation. In short term, it could theoretically de-escalate, but I believe that the implementation of Minsk agreements could create really a bunch of political, economic problems in Ukraine and divide the society. So in medium to long-term perspective, it could cause really huge problems for Ukraine mainly. And it will, and of course, the Minsk agreements are not able to solve the conflict that we have here. I mean, it's impossible to do that with what is written in this document, especially since Russia and Ukraine has diametrically opposite views on the conflict itself, on its nature, on its reason, on the causes of the conflict. And Russia till today doesn't see itself as party to this conflict. So I think the situation will, there will be one big attempt, which I see now, to resolve this situation through Minsk platform, or any other peace initiatives or mediation initiatives, for example, through Turkey. But on the other hand, I think that we will live with this tense situation throughout the whole 2022.
Thank you, Ilya. And to put long story short, how do you imagine the implementation of Minsk agreements that both sides of the conflict consider acceptable for them?
Well, the only way today of implementing Minsk agreements is actually, implementing it just point by point, so how they are written. But of course, the problem here is that the problem is not, the document itself. The problem is that they are written in a way which is not beneficial and which contradicts Ukraine's national interests. Because the main problem, there are two actually points that are very that agitate Ukrainians, and that are very considered to be dangerous for Ukraine. The first one is this special status for the occupied territory for Donbass, so for that part of Donbass which is occupied. In Ukraine, again, the majority of people they don't want to do that. They don't want to grant a certain part of territory a special status or an autonomy, because this will set a precedent for other regions, and this will create a political crisis, essentially, especially if the pro-Russian elites there on the occupied territories will gain a chance to legitimize themselves, for example, through local elections, which are also being written into Minsk agreements. And the second problem, again, is that Minsk agreements stipulate that local elections of the occupied territories should be organized before Ukrainian army gain control over the Russian-Ukrainian border. And this is also a problem because, of course, everyone understands that in this situation, you cannot have transparent, fair, and just local elections when you don't control the border, and Russia could still, alter the results. And this will actually lead to legitimizing part of the pro-Russian forces that are now in charge of these so-called republics in Donbass, and this will lead again to political divisions, ideological ones in Ukraine, after that, because there is no understanding how can you deal with people with whom you were at war for 8 years, and they will legitimize themselves. They will be legitimate Ukrainian officials, and this is a very big problem for Ukraine. And also, there is a third point, which is financial one. There is no understanding with Russia, at least till today, of what we know on who will pay for reconstruction of the occupied territories. You will have to pour a lot of money into this region to make reconstruction efforts, to try to restore local economy, which is damaged by 8 years of war. And again, of course, since Russia does not see itself as a party to the conflict, of course, they don't want to pay anything. And of course, they don't consider themselves to be obliged, under any obligation to do anything about that. So Ukraine itself could not do this because we have very limited financial resources, and this will drain Ukraine's resources for the years to follow. So this is the main problem with Minsk agreements, and since Ukraine today cannot, obviously can't force Russia or France or Germany to change the text of the agreement, because for that you will need, again, you will need Russia to accept that. And since we can't do that, the only way to implement them is to actually, implement what we have. And this is what President Zelensky and his team don't want to do, of course. But I think, again, theoretically, it is possible. It is possible, just need to make certain political decisions, but these decisions are unpopular. They will be met with resistance in Ukraine, especially in big cities like Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, where people, due to sociology, we can see that the majority of people are opposed to this kind of, to implement the Minsk agreements. And so it is unclear what the reaction of society will be. And I think this is the dilemma in which President Zelensky finds itself today, that there will be an attempt to force him to do that, but he cannot do that because of a very tense political situation inside Ukraine. So this is really, the main question is really how he can implement Minsk agreements if, for example, the situation will come to this without dire consequences for himself, his party, and his government, because this is really what many people are talking about today in Ukraine.
Thanks, Iliya. Andrzej, what are your thoughts about it? Is there a great war on the horizon?
Good morning once more. My speech will be really shorter than Iliya, because Iliya, I think, emphasized the main moments of situation really brilliant. The most thing which I like in Iliya's speech, that this is really this conflict, this geopolitical situation. It's really not about Ukraine only, or even not in general, not about Ukraine. It's really a huge Russian testing, Putin testing of European architecture of security, of European security in general, and of course of world security in general, because it's clear that we have absolutely new opening in security situation in global affairs after the Biden coming to White House, and also there is huge changing in Europe, in European Union. We have after the very long cadency of Angela Merkel, new chancellor in Berlin. Also, there is not clear the results of president election in France. There is a lot of splittings and misunderstandings inside of European Union. It's not clear how how relations between China and US will develop, how relations with China and European Union will develop in the future. What is at last but not least situation, what is the vision of European security and the role of Great Britain, which is now about a year outside European Union. And of course, for Putin now, it's amazing situation to test how world leaders, how West leaders are planning, how they are imagine the role of Russia, the role of Putin Russia in this new order, in this new world. So if we will check even political visit agenda of this week and the last week, during February and January, we are able to see that it's really a lot of meetings, a lot of summits on the highest level, and this West position toward Putin, it's not so really clear, and once more, Putin is using this unclear situation and are testing the West in a very brutal way, I can say. So, and here it's one my thesis, and another my thesis is that we will be able to see Putin aggression, results of Putin aggression, maybe it not be on Ukraine. If you will see that he will find that he will collect more profits on another direct, he will do it. And here, of course, Baltic countries are not safe. Also, Belarus, it's not safe, but on another hand, I'm not sure that there are some more ideas what to do in Belarus more than Putin have done, because in general we need to say that all democratic wave in Belarus was failed, was moved down absolutely. So we need to say that Kremlin can celebrate winning in Belarus, but who knows? Maybe there are some other plans, because Putin have to show his power. And I like also comments of in our mass media of our former ambassador and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vytauto Didžiojo, who really would stress that Putin needs performance. Putin needs to show his power, and clear also for me, especially after Macron visit in Moscow, that that West would like to negotiate with Putin very strongly. And for example, Macron talks about Finlandization of Ukraine. It's absolutely, it was a huge shock for me personally. It's really a terrible declaration that it means that West is ready for huge compromise. And Finlandization, it seems also that these Minsk agreements, which are not acceptable for Ukrainians, as Iliya spoke before, but this Finlandization, it means also big pressure for all Ukraine. This is absolutely tragical and terrible plan of Macron. But I would like, in any case, to finish my introduction with some also positive, small but positive actions. One thing which I think time to time we are forgetting about quite brave and active position of President Zelensky, because President Zelensky was criticized a lot inside Ukraine, and there were a lot of pessimistic voices after the last president election in Ukraine, that it's absolutely the end of democratic transition of Ukraine. It will be very weak presidency, and any optimistic changes cannot take place in Ukraine. So it's difficult to say from this day perspective, but in any case, I would like to say that Zelensky and his team showed for us that they have political muscles also in international arena. They are really strong players also inside Ukraine, and there is chances for Zelensky to be president of all Ukraine. Yes, so we of course we cannot close the eyes for some problems in Ukraine, and for some problems which are coming from president office, but in general I think this very pessimistic forecasts around Zelensky, they are not going to the life. So here, when we speak about Zelensky, when we speak about also a new Minister of Defense, about mood and organization in Ukrainian army, I think Ukraine showed during the last, especially the last half of year, that Ukraine is independent player, and even these red lines and even these suggestions which Ukraine is receiving from the West, it's not obligatory, they are accepted. So here Ukraine has its own view and its own red line and its own lines in national and in foreign policy. So here I am quite as outside observer, I am here quite optimistic. Another my optimistic view is connecting that maybe it's little joke, so it's joke in pessimistic times, that maybe thanks Putin, Thanks Putin, European leaders and West leaders will be more connected than before. And I'm not sure how many of you watched yesterday at 9 o'clock at evening the press conference of President Duda, Chancellor Scholz and President Macron. They met this Weimar trilingual format. They met in Berlin after 7-year breaks, because it's not big secret that there are a lot of conflicts between Warsaw and European Commission and European institutions. And yesterday they had meeting and the long talk about Ukraine. So who knows, maybe it's a very higher price, of course, but maybe thanks Ukraine and thanks Putin, we will have really joint position about European security and global affairs. So thank you on this moment.
Andrzej, let's talk a bit more about optimism and pessimism. You mentioned, why does the Ukrainian side seem much more optimistic about the perspective of war than Americans are? Why only Americans seem to be those who think the winter is coming, while Ukrainians would negate this? For more than 2 months, Washington seems to try to assure Ukrainians and the rest of the world that the war is almost inevitable. So what do you think?
Oh, I would like to repeat once more that on one hand, my optimism is connecting with Ukrainian political leaders. It seems for me that the current Ukrainian political leaders, nevertheless of some pessimistic forecasts, they are really leaders of their states, and they perfectly negotiating between world political leaders. If we will check situation, if we will check summits in Kiev, Kiev became in January and in February, Kiev became the capital of all world of global politics, and even I would like to remind the official visit of President Erdogan in the Kiev. Also, don't forget that the French president came to Kiev after a really very long break. So I think that Ukrainian political leaders, Ukrainian president, Ukrainian prime minister, they are really strong politicians in this moment, and they are trying to join also inside state consolidation, but also to be very active in the international arena. So this is my some optimistic view. But of course I am able to see a lot of problems and problems with social situation, with social security inside Ukraine. So it's, of course, this spring will be really very difficult for Ukraine. But political leaders, I think they are stronger that we imagine 1 year or 2 years before.
Ilya, why for more than 2 or 3 months Americans would repeat that war is on your threshold, and Ukrainians say no, there is no real possibility of war?
Now that's a tricky question. Really, we have at the beginning there are two thoughts on that which are being discussed in Ukraine. The first one is that first of all, really to start with, that really was a strange situation back in November and at the beginning of December last year, when the American media were the ones who started this information wave of, reporting that Russian troops are amassing our border, that the war is imminent, and so on and so on. And of course, there was a strange moment when Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian military firstly denied these reports, and they actually said that they had seen nothing, extraordinary on our borders. Then in a month, the situation changed, and of course in Ukraine, we also started to get reports from both Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian media that really the situation is tense. Russia is amassing troops on our borders, and that we are seeing a new military and political escalation. Well, two attempts to explain this are still being discussed in Ukraine. The first one is that the Americans know something that we don't. And it's still not being discussed publicly. And we don't know all the information that is there. And of course, their intelligence is working. Well, that's not very much secret. Of course, they monitor what is going on between Russia and Ukraine as part of, their efforts to keep the situation stable, especially since it's not only about Ukraine, but it's also about European security. They saw that something is going on, and then they conveyed the message to Ukrainians, and that's how it was. Now, the second version, or the second option, which to some extent, I was thinking about, because is that actually, there is a big difference between communication of the United States about Russia and what is going on and the situation unfolding around Ukraine and Ukraine, actually. That's why you have, when you watch Ukrainian media and American ones, you have, it's a huge difference on how they portray the situation. I think the problem here is that Ukrainian President Zelensky and our government, they have the only audience they communicate the situation to is the Ukrainian people, of course. And this is what actually bothers them the most, how to communicate this to Ukrainians. And of course, they are not interested in creating panic here, by saying that we will have war in 1-2 months, or the war is imminent, or you have to be ready, because for that you will need to really, make some effort to that. You need to mobilize people. You need to start at least, turning your economy on, and making your economy, warlike time, trying to, make decisions, which obviously they weren't planning to do for the time being. While the American president, when communicating the situation, of course, pays more attention to foreign audiences, so to the American public and the Western public in general, including the Europeans. That's why I think we saw very different messages from the Americans and Ukrainians, for example, because for President Biden, it is very important, to my mind, to explain why Russian threat is really serious, and it's a great danger for the whole European and Euro-Atlantic security. And that's why we saw these very really bold and to some extent informationally aggressive messages from the American media, these maps, and European, by the way, you had these numerous maps about how Russia will invade Ukraine and so on and so on. Even this, the latest, some of them were really analytically okay. I think some of them were somewhat not very specific. Even we noticed, I mean, when we were analyzing the maps, for example, around Ukraine, there were mistakes there. I mean, very different materials, very different quality. I mean, even the latest one, I think you saw that when Bloomberg published the news that Russia invaded Ukraine and then they deleted it, you know, we're now joking here in Ukraine about this, calling it the Bloomberg incident. You know, it was kind of an error, you know, a very symptomatic one. So I think the problem here is that really the United States and Ukraine have different audiences to communicate this situation. That's why we see a slight, you know, a radical difference in messages about what is going on. But of course, I think that to some extent, there is another moment to this, a political one. I think that also all these statements by American officials predominantly about the imminent threat of Russian aggression and Russian invasion maybe was also exploited by Washington just to raise stakes before this, before Putin-Biden summit in December and before the Geneva consultations in January, which took place which were held between Russian and American delegations. This was essential for both sides, and actually both American and Russian media really aggressively pushed forward, you know, their own narratives about Ukraine and about this tense situation. That's why I think it was part of this information preparation, media preparation for the consultations and for negotiations themselves. Because after the Geneva consultations in January, the pace of media coverage started to draw down. And now, for example, we don't see that big number of messages that we were getting back in December and January. So I think partly it was the difference in the perception of the situation. Partly it was the difference on, you know, the audience they need to communicate the messages. Partly it was political, of course. I mean, it was made on purpose for political, ideological reasons. And of course, it was a bit frustrating for Ukrainian officials. I mean, you can see that in President Zelensky's remarks. He even was forced to make a video, a special video. I think it was in January. He published a video statement by himself to Ukrainian people, urging them to stay calm, you know, not to panic, that everything is okay. And also this gives you the understanding of how well, you know, how uncomfortable these media, you know, this media coverage was to Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian government, because they really didn't want to hurry up, you know, with the forecasts and conclude. They didn't really want to jump to conclusions, you know, immediately.
Iliya, are there any reliable polls and data indicating the Ukrainian society resolution to fight with the Russians if the war starts?
Yes, well, our institute, our Ukrainian Institute for the Future, conducted a survey 2 weeks ago, no, 1.5 weeks ago, and it showed that 56% of Ukrainians are ready to fight Russians in case of invasion, and above 60% of Ukrainians are ready to mobilize themselves for the so-called territorial defense. This is, you know, a new paramilitary structures that are being created here under the Ministry of Defense. This is, you know, in case of an invasion, we will have defense units, you know, like supporting units for the army created in different cities, you know, to oppose a possible occupation, for example. And of course, like above 60% of Ukrainians are ready to participate in such territorial defense units, and this is really a high number. So actually, Ukrainians, I think psychologically, morally, Ukrainians will definitely defend their land, especially in case of occupation, you know, and invasion, because this is well. I mean, we have nowhere to run, you know, and this is logically. But again, it depends on many factors. Actually, at the same time, for example, one can tell that, of course, no one wants war, and of course, no one wants a big escalation. And so the main question which is being discussed nowadays in Ukraine is whether the war will happen and what form will it take, because this is really unclear today. In my opinion, I don't believe in an all-out, full-blown total war between Russia and Ukraine, because I think it will be too costly, too difficult. Well, first of all, for Russia, because it will take enormous amount of resources to just to not only to occupy at least half of Ukraine, but also to maintain their presence and to keep the territories, you know, and to control them. I don't see even a military logic here, but a limited use of force by Russia is really possible, and I think the threat is still high, because as Andrzej said, and he was correct about it, is this that Russia really need to show what they mean. They can't just you know, go around and just throw statements, you know, about how they will punish Ukraine for that and this. They need to, at some point, especially if the negotiations with the West will fail, they will be forced. It's in their psychology. They will be forced to demonstrate that they talk seriously, and this will require them to use force, at least limited force. For example, along the line of contact in Donbass, where they have all the means to do that by escalating tensions in any moment, because we understand that they control the situation effectively there.
Andrzej, you mentioned Macron and the perspective of Finlandization of Ukraine that he presumably presented in Moscow. Let us shortly consider Germany's position toward Ukraine. How do you find it? I mean, first of all, no German weapons to Ukraine, only helmets, make love not war, and so on.
Oh, I think it's a complicated question, even a base question. Please have in your mind that yesterday, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany moved to the front line during her visit in Kiev and in Ukraine. She moved to front line. So this is, I think, very also strong message if we will speak about positive sides from Germany. But on another hand, please remind that after Scholz and Biden meeting in Washington, there were journalist questions, and also there were a question to Scholz during CNN huge interview about suspending of Nord Stream 2. So and we didn't hear answer that Germany can suspend Nord Stream 2 immediately. So decision is haven't made. So this is absolutely now big question how Scholz will deal this unusual situation. I think we will hear some concretes after the Scholz official meeting in Kremlin, after the meeting with Putin. In general, here I am semi-optimistic, if I can say truth for you. So here, if will be pressure from US, from Great Britain, from some small and middle actor of European Union, so maybe this position will be more pro-Ukrainian. But it seems that the Scholz are not ready to have really strong anti-Putin position. So here I'm not. When we speak about Scholz, I'm not so optimistic. So we will see. Yeah.
Iliya, what is the mood of Ukrainian ruling elite and broader society in respect to Germany's policy toward Ukraine?
In respect to Germany's, you're muted.
I mean, Germany's position toward Ukraine in all this context.
I see. Well, the mood here is mainly negative towards Germany. It has been like that since July last year, when the United States and Germany concluded this agreement on Nord Stream 2, when they published a statement about that Nord Stream 2 which actually said that Nord Stream 2 will be built, and the United States will be exempted from sanctions. It will not go forward with the sanctions against the pipeline. And since then, of course, several issues became, formed this kind of negative attitude in Ukraine towards Germany. The first one is this, of course, Nord Stream 2 issue. In Ukraine, the understanding here, the perception here is that it is purely political project. It is just some kind of concession by Germany to Russia, and of course it is inappropriate. And Germans, they want to trade with Russia more than they want to support Ukraine. The second issue, which became a problem in German-Ukrainian relations, is of course this issue of the delivery of arms deliveries to Ukraine. Ukrainian officials, including our foreign minister and president, have been raising this question since the first escalation by Russia in spring last year. So they were trying to convince Germany to start delivering arms to Ukraine. And of course, Germany refused several times. Both Angela Merkel's government and now Chancellor Scholz's government also refuses to do that, referring their principles of foreign policy, one of which is that they don't send weapons to zones of conflict. And in Ukraine, in Ukraine, it doesn't. A few people understand this argument, because they think it's just, they think that Germans are just saying this so to avoid delivering weapons and agitating Russia in this way, provoking Russia. And the third issue is, of course, the sanctions against Russia. Again, for several years, Ukraine has been constantly raising the issue that the anti-Russian sanctions on the European side should be strengthened and should be expanded. And every time, of course, negotiations about that struck a dead end, because Europeans, mainly Germany, of course, were against imposing preventive sanctions. So they perceive the situation: if there is no new invasion, then we will not impose new sanctions. And this also frustrates Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian government, because they see it as, again, a concession to Russia. And this is what also causes this stir in relations between Berlin and Kiev. So today, I think the mood in Ukraine is really, pretty negative about that. Many Ukrainians see Germany, and unfortunately, Ukrainian officials talk about this publicly sometimes. They see Germany as more of, Russia's friend or partner than Ukraine's ally. I have another view on this. I don't think that this is. I think that Germany's foreign policy is more complicated than that. I just think that there is a huge misunderstanding between Germans and Ukrainians. I mean, in Ukraine, many people, they just, I think what is going on, Germany's position is very much based on, first of all, their historical perception of Russia, and secondly, on their view of how politics should work. And this is not, it is not shared in Ukraine, because Ukraine and Germany have, in my opinion, very different views on how to deal with Russia, how to perceive Russia, what is a Russian threat. I mean, even this question, we have a big difference, because well, of course, for Ukraine, the Russian threat is imminent. It is really real and tangible, because we can see it, I mean, in our territory. And for Germans, of course, it is not, they don't look that way, because for them, they don't see Russia as a military threat for them, because they don't believe that Russia will, I don't know, someday, for example, invade Germany. And that's why I think there is a huge difference in this in perception of Russia and Russian threat. And that's why we have this kind of problem between Germany and Ukraine. So I think it's more political, ideological, you know, even some kind of cultural issue to some extent. And that what drives this negative, you know, attitude between Berlin and Kyiv, unfortunately, because actually I don't think this is very good for Ukraine's relations with the West, because Germany, I mean, even if we put aside all these issues that they really want to increase trade and economic partnership with Russia, they really one of key supporters of Ukraine in terms of, for example, financial aid. And Germany has been supporting Ukraine for many years. So we cannot say that it's like they weren't supporting Ukraine or in some way. They were supporting, but in their own way. Well, for example, the United States is the main security partner for Ukraine, but Germany, especially given the fact how influential Germany is in the European Union, during, for example, making decisions on how to or whether to allocate financial aid, for example, to Ukraine. I think it's one of key supporters of Ukraine. But now we have, because of the situation caused by Russia, we have this minor, well, now it's minor, and I hope it will remain so, crisis in bilateral relations.
Let's hope that the tide will be turning in Germany's policy. And on that note, we are going to end our discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, if any of you have more questions for Iliya and Andrzej, please seek them out and they will be glad to answer, I'm sure. Andrzej, Iliya, I want to thank you for your participation, and I look forward to our next meetings. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.